Welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we are continuing our discussion on Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. Today, we will be focusing on the first half of the novel, looking at some of our favorite moments.
We're really excited to dig into Angie's prequel, and we're gonna try to be thorough in the first half. There's a lot to cover, in a novel like this one, because we also have to think about its predecessor, which is its sequel. Um, so I think you, Vanessa, had mentioned pre-show that you had the epigraph, right? That you
Yeah,
wanted to talk about.
so it just says, "For all the roses growing in concrete, keep blossoming." And obviously, that just ties into everything that's going on in the book. It kind of gives you an idea of what's going on, I think. But it's also a message of hope for all of these other people, for anyone that reads this book that is also, I guess in a way struggling, but kind of figuring out life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, going back to that Tupac poem you read the first time, and like you're saying, it's very counterintuitive, right? Something as natural as a plant um, growing in something that is not suited for its environment. Um, and it's it's the way also the novel becomes organized. Part one is germination, part two is growth, um, part three, trying to remember off the top of my head. I know the last part is bud. Was part three development or no?
I think it's dormancy.
Dormancy. That's why you're the fact checker.
Strikes again.
Yeah. Yeah. So and it's a very important symbol that takes on the literal component, as well as we'll cover later on, with Mav's own gardening attempts at gardening later on. So we'll get to that. The story starts off pretty playfully. As this novel can be kind of hard to get through, I think, similar to The Hate You Give, because of its violence. But in the beginning, you have just this. They're in the court and they're talking smack, as you would expect. So it's King, Mav, the rest of the crew. And I think you, Vanessa, right, had that passage on page 7.
Yeah. So towards the bottom of the page, it kind of breaks down the different levels of the gang members. Yes, I don't know why I couldn't think of that.
Fact check the fact checker. Oh yeah.
So it describes them as being the youngins, who are the middle schoolers, and then the little homies, which is Maverick and King, and then the big homies, which is Dre and Sean, and then he later names the OGs, which is I guess his dad is one of them.
Yeah, and they mentioned that the rest of them are dead or in prison, like him. Those OGs.
But I felt like that was really interesting, and it really sets up it kind of breaks down how Maverick is going to interact with these people throughout the novel, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to remember if we had gotten this kind of explanation of its hierarchy and that you give, but I don't think we did, right? Because we weren't
Mm-hmm.
seeing things from Mav's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
or even King's. So yeah, Richie, I know you mentioned this last time with part one. You were talking about this. Well, you two were both talking about this hierarchy. Um, what did you think of it?
Oh, do you mean like the explanation of the group dynamics?
Yeah, just seeing how kind of King and him are still kind of considered the little homies, and you know,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, not at this point, but you definitely see it a few times throughout the first half of the later on in later iterations in the book where he refers to it as a fraternity. Yeah, so you have this tier. I think it's interesting. Especially within the lens that both Maverick and King are the sons of like the former leaders. There's a
mhm.
lot going on with structure too, but also family ties, and I think Dre being part of it is kind of like a bridge as one of the ups or one of the big homies taking care of his cousin as a little homie in Maverick. Um, as a promise, to his mom. But yeah, I think I like the way it's laid out. And it definitely does play into kind of like the rising conflict as the novel progresses.
Yeah, and you do see that, the legacy, right? Because they're referred to as Little Don and um, right, Little Zeke, and even just from this scenario, like a basketball game, um, King right away kind of is already, kind of overstepping his boundaries, right? And so you kind of get a clear characterization of him where, he's not going to let a big homie get in his way. Um, so he's already got that attitude problem. Um, and Mav kind of informs us later on, and on page 9 that like his parents were murdered, he's a foster, etc. Right? So he's had it rough. Um, at the same time, so it is kind of an interesting background for King. Um, and then Carlos comes in, and we had talked about Carlos right last time, and of course Carlos becomes a police officer in The Hate You Give. Um, what about later on? Did you guys have in the tens or twenties?
A side bit with the whole Carlos introduction. It is pretty funny, and I like how Angie Thomas is kind of playing around a little bit with the language here. Where Maverick, the way he describes, he interrogated me like he was police.
Mm. Yeah, it's good fan service there. And I like also how his mother here, who's introduced, we haven't talked about her much. Um, on page 15, she's already kind of pushing him to like go to school, so you can get out of here. Um, so I think, her importance is, of course, her influence is of course very important. And it's good that, she's there for him, right? Because for someone like King, he doesn't have someone like that pushing him in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, on that point, the first passage I kind of had highlighted that I wanted to bring kind of went off of that. Um, where it is confirmed his child and he's been abandoned, and it's his mother who's telling him. It's on page 27. I mean, I guess we can go back if we need to, because I know you have an earlier passage, Vanessa. But
No, well, I was going to talk about page 25, but
oh,
I guess
okay, yeah,
it's
go for it.
the same thing.
Okay, yeah.
Well, so on page 25 is right after Maverick changes sevens, or I guess King Jr. at this point in the story. He changes his diaper for the first time, and then when he comes out, he sees that Aisha and her mom are gone. So this is kind of where he was forced to have to like take on this father role for the first time.
Right. Yeah, and so they take him home, and he's still kind of he's processing it, and you know it's his mother who pretty much lays it all down to him. So that's where my passage was on middle to end of the page on page 27. When she just straight up tells him, "You're gonna do whatever you have to do, Maverick." That's what being a
Mm,
parent means. Your child is now your responsibility. You'll be changing his diapers. You'll be feeding him. You'll be dealing with him in the middle of the night. And of course, he kind of breaks off in this thought. I really like the style too that Thomas uses here to kind of express Maverick's thoughts all throughout. Um, you know, he kind of has a pause to think like, man, she doesn't even care. When obviously the truth is she does a lot, right? And I
mm,
love the description of the mother that we get, and it's through the lens of his grandmother's words describing his mother to him, right? And that's what I had highlighted here. Um, yeah, talking about the mother, the grandmother says, she came in the world ready for whatever. When things fall apart, she quick to grab the pieces and make something new out of them. That was a really
mm,
Hmm.
little moment of thinking back, and that's pretty much what he's left with. That's what he has to do. That's his life now. He's got to put it back together.
Yeah, and that description you read reminds me of Xiomara. Because the way she was born, right? What was it, feet first,
mm, mhm,
and her name itself, right, is a fighter or something like that. So kind of, she's got that fighter in her, right, and someone
mm,
who's not gonna back down, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, those are. I mean, we learn a lot within those pages about the role that Maverick's mother is going to play. That you know, and it's also noted that Aisha's mom kind of doesn't isn't really present. You know, she's not really interested. So
mm,
she's kind of like the opposite. Like she just kind of leaves everything. Aisha's mother, that is.
And I think she also Aisha's mom isn't very supportive and like in comparison to Maverick's mom. Like she
Exactly.
has him handle everything on his own, but she's there and she's got him. But Aisha's mom is kind of like, you did this, you're on your own kind of thing. So
Step on your
it's
own, you do
interesting.
it. Super
Yeah.
interesting, right? Sorry,
Hmm.
sorry.
No, you're good.
But yeah, like I like the way it's kind of sets them up as foils in that way.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah, and so a lot of these moments at the beginning have that, kind of, like I said, the kind of lighthearted moments that really show you the struggles of single parenthood, and even with the help of his mom here, right? He's still struggling clearly, and he's learning the hard way, um, but he's learning is, I think, the important point there.
mm,
Yeah, exactly.
Even as sometimes he kind of is resentful of the of how they're kind of really rubbing it in, right? That too bad, right? You got a kid, you got to take care of him.
mm,
Yeah, I mean, it's also why I think Dre becomes so important because Dre understands being, a father in this case, and I think that's
mm,
he's able to support him in this.
That is true. Yeah.
He supports him in so many ways, but yeah, I just he couldn't because in the beginning, he sees him as part of the gang or as kinging, but we learn slowly throughout how Dre plays a more unique role, I guess, and that
Hmm.
he tries to make sure that he leaves Maverick off of like the heavy stuff, kind of the heavy kind of selling, kind of has them barely involved, but more so once he has the baby, kind of helping him with expensive like stuff that would be extra expensive, like, and by giving him hand downs from what he used to have when he had his baby.
Mm.
He would just help sometimes.
Yeah. And speaking of which, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you said, Richie, you had like 34, 35 as your one of your passages a little later.
Yeah, exactly. So just kind of expanding on that, my passage was on page 34, where I believe, yeah, he's talking with Dre, and it's one of their first kind of like heart to heart talks. I love that they're able to kind of express themselves a little bit more freely with each other. So the passage I highlighted starts with hell no, top middle of the page. Hell no. My life got thrown into a blender and I'm left with something I don't recognize. On top of that, I'm suddenly somebody's pops and I wish I had my pops. I chose this passage because it's a true moment of just vulnerability and honesty. And it mimics the passage or to me it parallels a little bit the passage earlier about his mom, how she works with that. When life hands you these things that you don't recognize, and she's able to make something out of it. Whereas in this case, he's noting the absence of his father, which I think you yourself mentioned, single fatherhood being something that's going to be discussed throughout, um, here, especially on, and then just I think throughout the book, the theme of masculinity and what that entails and what it means plays throughout, and so him not having his father really around, I think, kind of leaves that hole. And again, you mentioned King as an example of someone who did lose his father, and I think it's interesting the kind of people who end up filling some of these roles to him, which he considers right. Like Wyatt, we kind of touched about that on the first episode, but I know we'll get a good chance this first part, to talk about that. But I just felt that line in itself, kind of opens itself or plants a seed for some of these later scenes in which he has a developing relationship with Dre, in which he can really just kind of let his guard down, quote
Mm.
unquote, and share his feelings that, I feel he can't do with his friends because they're always ragging on him and making fun of him and giving more of a hard time for his situation. I liked it in that sense. We'll touch on some of those things later.
Yeah, I mean, those are all really good points about the role that Dre is playing in throughout all this. Um, and even he admits it, right? That like he's not gonna be able to hide those things from him, because he knows, or he's gonna find out either way. Um, but yeah, so there's a kind of confrontation here, right? Because um, he's kind of selling on his side and trying to make more money, and there's the kind of an allusion to Doug there, right? Because the kicks that he's wearing, they're nice, right? Just like Star had, right, with Khalil at the beginning. Um, that's kind of what they've noticed, and it's kind of interesting, later on that Dre's kind of helping him break that cycle, right? Of he says literally you could break the cycle. What else did you all have later on?
I got like until 45.
Okay.
So something that we obviously always talk about on the show is names and the importance of names. Um, so in this moment, it's a conversation between um Maverick and his dad. Um, and he's telling him that his son is named after King. And so it says Zeke named King that in honor of the set. I got nothing against it or your homeboy, but your son ought to have something of his own, a name with purpose. I was real mindful when I named you. Maverick Malcolm Carter. Maverick mean independent thinker. Malcolm come from Malcolm X. Guess Pops wanted me to be a leader from the jump. Um, so it shows like the importance that have like a name has and like towards who you become in life. When we talked about the hate you give, we talked about King and how he ultimately became, I guess, the big homie for the King Lords.
Yeah, I love the line in that same conversation where Dad Don Adonis encourages him, give him a name that tells him who he is and who he can be. The world's gonna try and do that enough. Kind of idea of external, like the external forces of the world, like they're already gonna be
Mm.
coming over you and what their preconceived notions of you are and where you come from and who you are. And so I love this idea of the name kind of being part of your own search of self and having a name that with purpose means so much in this world.
Mm.
Yeah, like you were saying, Vanessa, we've talked a lot in this series in our show about the etymology and the importance of it. You know, going back to Poetics, like I had mentioned, um, and we of course also see this with the hate you give. So it's nice that Angie is giving fans, more of this background into Mav um, and King and such. Um, and the name here for Maverick, it's something to think about also with kind of how he's whether he is going to go on his own direction, given what we know about him in The Hate You Give. Um, with the King Lords, and little it's it's been mentioned that they have this rivalry with the Garden Disciples, and and of course he's got his own kids, so um with Dre there, you have to wonder up to this point that he's gonna be able to chart his own path, right, being a Maverick. um but then things get pretty dark here um a little later on. um Interspliced with some of the discussion about uh what's he gonna name him. um so did you all have a passage from there, like in the 50s or in the 60s maybe?
I mean, I do have passages, but I don't know if they're burned off the naming thing.
Hmm.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Did you have any, Vanessa?
I have 55.
Oh, okay, okay.
Is it the one you were going to talk about?
No, no, no. Well,
Yeah.
no, go ahead. But I just wanted to point out on 53. I thought it was a interesting thing is how um Maverick still hasn't told Lisa about what's happened, and he's kind of keeps holding it off. He'd rather tell in person, of course. Great, but I do like the line of on the bottom of page 53. You got to tell her, or the streets will.
Mm.
Kind of the way people operate. So I thought that was a
Hmm.
pretty good line.
Yeah. Yeah, and going back to manhood, right? He's still afraid of confronting that reality, whether it's with Lisa, Dre, King, um, and even to some extent, his mom, and then later on, um, Mr. Wyatt. He's got this kind of bad habit of, trying to run away from problems, trying to hide the truth. So it's good that he's got people here who kind of call him out on it, like Dre does. And then on 55, Vanessa, what is it you want to say about the whole Tupac thing here?
Um, so this is kind of where he gets the idea for the name Seven. Um, so it's all of the different connections that Tupac has to the number seven. So he talks about um, He was shot on the 7th. He died 7 days after that, exactly 7 months to the day that all eyes on me dropped. And then later on it says, he died at 4:03 p.m. 4 plus 3 is 7. He was born on the 16th. 1 plus 6 is 7. He was also 25 when he died. 2 plus 5, 7. And then the 7-day theory is kind of what they're talking about. And so that, like, he's talking about it, and Maverick gets really like hyped up about the idea, and then later on when he's thinking about names, he thinks that 7 is the perfect name for his son.
Yeah. And it's also a nice area where we get this reference to those of us who are old enough to remember the whole Y2K scare. That unlike the pandemic didn't actually cause any trouble. So yeah, I mean, more etymology here. And going back, of course, to the hate you give, and kind of the Tupacian philosophy that Angie's building, right? From kind of this whole conspiracy, but also the importance of the naming someone, and having a role model too.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a sense of I think I mentioned this the first episode, but his again having a role model, and he's trying to think. Maverick's thinking about himself as a role model, and that's why he's already seeking a better opportunity in life for his son. That's why he considers him like he's looking at this idea of perfection, like a more perfect version of himself. That's how he sees his
Mm.
son.
Yeah, definitely the way that I think every parent, I think, right, sees their own kid. And there's a lot here then about the legacy, right? Going back to what we talked about with Little King and Little Zeke, um, and how that plays into the different directions, right? Manhood can take you.
Next passages are 58 and 59. I don't know if you guys had anything
Mm.
before or around there.
Mm.
No.
Okay, so this kind of goes off, and I've already alluded to it already in this episode, but now we get a better sense of the different types of love centered around Maverick and the raising of his son in the situation he's in. We've already talked about the mother and how he's missing his father, but you also have the influence of the Wyatts here mentioned in these pages. And so on page 58, you kind of see. So Dre has already been giving Mav his own kind of tough love, where yeah they can relate, but also he's being very demanding that he stop this extra side gig that he's been doing with King, and he's kind of forcing him to stop and make King stop too. That's one kind of tough love. You also have the kind of tough love you see from Mr. Wyatt, where he's trying to teach him no sir, yes sir, no sir, when talking to people, to others. And Maverick goes back to this memory of when his father's was arrested, and the Wyatts actually took Maverick in, because the police they were gonna take him away, and so they took care of him. And then of course, on 59, the next page, you also see how Mrs. Wyatt's offering to babysit while Maverick is gonna be working. It could be because Wyatt also gives him a job, at the grocery store and working the garden. So I just thought that was a kind of like a pivotal moment in understanding some of their relationships here.
For sure. And also with Mr. Wyatt's grocery store, um, we find out that it's been there. It's as old as the garden, and so it's got that history behind it. Um, it's kind of its own rose, right, that has grown out of that concrete, that's been nurturing um um Mav here, since he was a kid, um and that now, where he needs it is there for him, right, with his job, even though he of course is very hesitant to take that on, because he kind of feels that um they're going to be on top of him, right, and he doesn't of course want that. And later on, Mav talks with Lisa, and um he has this moment in 66 where he's kind of imagining, he has this kind of what I call like a false shadowing, in the sense that doesn't really happen, at least so far, but that she's gonna live in a mansion, have a bunch of kids, um she's gonna go to college and all of these kinds of things, and that he doesn't imagine that for himself is the thing. um so at this point, I think Maverick doesn't really have that much confidence in himself clearly. And I think later on, we'll talk about some of the passages where he really is like quite academically fluent, and in a sense, he's able to kind of give you these insightful takes on all kinds of things, and he just doesn't really realize it, I guess. He doesn't make much of it.
Mm.
Did y'all have something there in the 70s?
I had 73.
Okay.
Um, so this is like in the middle of the night when Seven is crying, and Maverick like, he's exhausted and he like no longer knows how to handle the situation. And so he kind of just leaves. That says, "I shouldn't snap, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I can't make him stop crying. I can't sleep. I can't do this. I set him in his crib as he screamed at the top of his little lungs, and I walk out the room." And so he essentially just goes out to the front porch and sits down. Um, but like even throughout like the rest of the novel, he kind of goes back to this moment when he like wanted to give up. Um, but I think the important part like is that he does go back and he doesn't give up. He like continues to try to be there for Seven.
Yeah, Vanessa, and this is what I meant, in part one, where I think this would be a great novel to kind of have discussions about in high school classrooms, where, like you had said, Richie, that there really isn't a of comprehensive sex ed, right, in classrooms. It's a lot of times um, misrepresented, or you know um, just one unit, right, as opposed to like a whole semester or something. Um, and The frustration there is almost poetic, right, and how there's that anaphora, right, and um, the stresses that Madman is causing him um, also make Maverick, I think, more resourceful, right, because he's able to multitask, um, and it's pretty impressive actually, right, later on, how he's able to take care of so many things while he's taking care of the baby. So he doesn't realize it as the thing once again. And then I think on 76, right, is where um he says, right, and I don't know if anyone had this passage on 76, 77. Yeah. um so he says, after talking to Dre about the Tupac theory, um he says, it said that seven represents perfection and that people tend to hold it above the rest. I think I want to name him Seven. And then he goes on to say, I think I want to make Maverick his middle name. Everybody say he looks like me. Since that's the case, I want him to be the best version of me, the perfect Maverick Carter. Um, so he ends up, taking Dre's idea to heart. That Seven is going to be his perfect version, and I think that's where I think maybe he starts to turn one of the corners in his life, right? Because to that point, having King Jr., right, or they call him Man, right? But um, I don't know. I think up to that point, it isn't the relationship isn't as it's more of the kind of um, he sees it as a hassle, right? And like you were saying, Vanessa, in that passage, right? He's seems like he's gonna have a breakdown.
Mm.
But then after naming him, I think he finally, he does turn that corner little by
Mm-hmm.
little. Um, and then I have page 81 a little later. I don't know if any of you had anything before that.
Mm-mm.
No. Um, well, it's a small passage that just describes the setting. This novel, like we had said, is set 17 years before They Hate You Give. And so we found, it's I guess the year is 1998. And the school is Garden High. So Garden High is really named Jefferson High School, but people rarely call it that. I researched that man, and nothing need to be named after him. He was a slave owner and the president of the Confederate States. Garden Heights always been mostly black, and I figure whoever named the school after him did it as a middle finger to all of us, like they calling us slaves. So last year, and maybe this was on Angie's mind as she wrote this, if she was still writing this at the time, but for some time now, I think we've had this discussion of Confederate statues, and I know that a lot of people were saying that people were destroying history by taking down those statues, but because of George Floyd, there was a lot of, I think, a good discussion about that idea. Um, so here, it puts the name into context, right? Of being named after Jefferson Davis, and um, how they try to turn that around, right, by giving it its own name. So I really like that detail, um, and it kind of shows that they have that awareness about themselves, about the area. So yeah, um, and I think with everything that's gone on, the Confederate flag at the Capitol, I think it's a very, like I said, a very small passage, just one paragraph, but um, I think it would be a good place to talk about this kind of thing within history, right? And the history of the Confederacy, which only lasted a few years, but a lot of people still hold on to those racist ideas.
Yeah, man. The next passage I had is very closely related to that.
Mm.
When he's talking about his history class,
Yeah, go for it.
the teacher there is Phillips, and in this case, it's similar where but thinking about again U.S. history, but as colonialism. Um, he says the passages on the page top of page 87. I fell asleep in U.S. history. It was boring anyway. I'm tired of hearing about all these fucked up white people who did fucked up stuff, yet people want to call them heroes. Phillips talked about how Columbus discovered America, and all I could think of was how the hell can you discover a place where people already lived? Funny how that worked. So it's in a very similar vein of, questioning that, why are you going to name the school this, after this guy? this history, and then thinking about even in his own history class. Um, yeah, this very wrong concept of Columbus discovering America that people still love to teach in history classes, especially to the youth, create heroes out of discoverers.
Mm.
Definitely. And I like also the, like you said, right, that, it's important, fertile ground to, for the classroom is for these kinds of discussions, because, a lot of times they become very tokenized, you know, like Columbus Day is like furniture sale, right? Or, you know,
Mm.
so a lot of people lose that connection, and so even if they get in a classroom, um, it just kind of becomes part of the social sphere that people don't even think about it much anymore. But I think more and more, with social media, people become more aware of it because they raise that awareness. Um, but I also like the nod in the, and to Hate You Give here with talking about the how Romeo and Juliet, like she was a queen lord and he was a GD, a garden disciple, in other words. Because I was remembering in Hate You Give, Star compares it to, or Mav, I think it is, compares it
Mhm.
to Harry Potter.
Yeah,
So, um,
yeah. I was gonna mention that too, like how he has that lens for Romeo and Juliet. They went
mhm.
out on
Mm.
their own
Mhm.
terms, like straight up G's.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, it's nice, he Mav as a character is humorous, he's struggles, and he's really relatable. So,
I mean, there's a lot of stuff here, especially like in these high school sections that I think, in terms of teaching, bring up interesting conversation.
mhm.
Even going back to the passage of the high school in his name, I was just remembering now, like the whole reason King was expelled from school, and that coach.
Mm.
I don't know if
Oh
you
yeah,
guys had that on around page 90, 91.
yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's such an interesting backstory because, you know, in if you have read They Hate You Give, you see King in a different light. But here he's kind of like a hero in the way he stood up to this coach. But I think it's super interesting how he brings up this stuff on page 90, where he says this dude was a redneck. He didn't throw around the N word. Nah, it was other stuff like having a Confederate flag on his truck, calling it heritage. I think that opens that line brings a pretty good, interesting discussion. On what does that actually mean.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, and even though he doesn't throw the N-word around like Mav says here, he doesn't need to, right? And so there's that iconography behind the Confederate flag, like you're saying, right? That would be a good discussion. And then also, I mean, even more the dead ringer there of, I mean, he calls him boy, and he is technically, I guess, a boy, but boy, of course, also has that racial connotation behind it. So it's very problematic.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, that is definitely interesting, Richie, how, he is kind of mythologized here, right, for standing up to this authority figure.
Yeah.
And it's we also find out, the Wyatts were actually fostering him, and but he ended up going to juvie, and naturally, they were too strict on him. So, did you all have something else here in the 90s or 100s?
Mm.
I mean, I don't know if you guys have 102, 103. I think that's such a
Yeah.
huge passage, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't really have anything before it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the epigraph, and here we get the little representation of a garden. Mr. Wyatt kind of gives him this little assignment here, you know, or starts talking about how this all works, right? And um, so he starts by saying here, you only putting roses in this bed? That's a plan, Mr. Wyatt says here. Roses need space to grow. Why you ask? Seems like a lot of space to give something you can't eat. You might be right, he admits. I like to be reminded that beauty can come from much of nothing. To me, that's the whole point of flowers. Um, and then at the bottom, he goes on and says, roses, they're fascinating little things, can handle more than folks think. I've had roses in full bloom during an ice storm. They could easily survive without any help. We want them to thrive. We'll have to prune them, things like that. Um, so, there's of course the literal representation of roses having that resiliency, and how it shows Mr. Wyatt's attention to detail and care. Um, but of course, there's a symbolism behind it. So, um, what did you guys think of that?
No, I thought this was a really good passage just because this is the first time that we really get to see him like working in the garden.
Mm,
Um, and I think like through Mr. Wyatt, there's like a lot of really good advice and like lessons that he teaches him, like just from working in the garden alone.
hmm
Yeah, getting him a work ethic. Yeah, what I liked about this is, kind of building on my conversation earlier. I just kind of wanted to build up naturally through our discussion of the book, but this notion that Mr. Wyatt doesn't just because the fact is that roses can survive in harsh conditions, but to him, he it's not just about surviving; it's about thriving. And so, what does that mean? So again, looking at both the literal and figurative. In this case, obviously, the figurative roses. I mean, it's kind of on the nose, right? But their whole hood is Garden Heights, and they call it the Garden, right?
Mm,
So you have this literal garden in which I think it's pointed, but the fact that they're just having this discussion on pruning, right, getting rid of what they don't need, and I just think it's such a great reflection of why Maverick is this concrete rose, and he's trying to get rid of
mm,
everything that he doesn't need, and he is battling this life that he's known with the King Lords, or kinging as I think he calls it,
mm,
and now having to raise a human beings, start thinking about these kind of things. So um, that's why I really liked that specific instance of the passage where Wyatt's insisting on not just survival but thriving.
mhm,
Yeah, and the pruning that you mentioned, it's an interesting interpretation of yours of kind of you know um, looking at the thorns that Mav might have. Um, but I'm also thinking of like because of the King Lords, right, and the Garden Disciples, how they kind of pruned themselves, right, and each other, both I guess within the intergang violence, but also the intergang, right, because of how King kind of from the beginning, right, is kind of um, trying to rise up in that ladder and trying to go behind, the race back and all that. So
Right, that discussion there, if it doesn't help them grow, kind of like when you act against the whole unit, the whole gang, get
yeah.
pruned.
mm,
And then I didn't have something till like page 120.
mm.
I had something 115. Get anything before Vanessa?
No.
Okay. Um, and this is another conversation between Dre and Maverick, and again when he's venting, um, about not having Lisa, King, Junior, and Rico don't come around when I at school or work. I'm stuck at home, and then Dre just kind of simply asks him, "Is that's what defines you?" very kind of important, like reframing and repositioning for him. Doesn't understand just yet, but mm, will eventually get to. Like
Mm.
I said, just a quick little observation.
Yeah.
The way, I like the way he just kind of called him out on that. Like those are the things that defined you.
Yeah. Yeah, because from the beginning, Mav has this kind of idea, right? Being little down that, he's going to grow up to be an OG, right? And um, it's good that he has his people who, like I said, um, make him question those and interrogate himself. I think that's one of the best things that someone who's young can do, right? Is for their own development. And again, this is, I think we're still under growth for the part one. Um, so he's definitely growing here.
Part two growth.
What's that?
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
I was thinking out loud. Part one is germination.
Mm. Oh, okay, yeah. Part two is growth,
Yeah,
right?
so we're getting
Okay.
there, but we're there, right? Like that's what's germinating, like everything that you're kind of as you're getting there.
Yeah,
Mm.
but yeah, just a little later on 120, um, he talks a little bit here about what happens when he says, when a king lord gets killed, chances are it was a GD. Remember the one who told me my cousin better watch his back. Um, and then, so this is right after, unfortunately, Dre becomes a victim here, right? And there was nothing that, just like with Star and Khalil, there was nothing that Mav could do. Um, so it's a very traumatic moment for him, losing someone like Dre. Um, and he doesn't know who it was, but he says here, now Ant got a target on his. I swear if he did this, I'm gonna kill him. He suspects Ant, as someone who's kind of been there trash talking from the beginning, and also a garden disciple. Um, and then kind of my line, strong line here at the bottom says, Pops told me the other day that grief is something we all gotta carry. I never understood that till now. Feel like I got a boulder on my back. It weighed down my whole body, and I'd be wanting to cry out to make the pain go away. Men ain't supposed to cry. We're supposed to be strong enough to carry our boulders and everybody else's. Um, and there's a moment later on where he kind of has a discussion about this whole thing with Mr. Wyatt. But here it's just him remembering, what his father told him about grief. And if anyone's seen that WandaVision,
I was just thinking about that, man. I was like, dude, that's what a great line.
yeah, where what's his the vision, right, says, what is grief if not but love persevering, in response to Wanda, being mourning, right, and having suffered so much, lost her family, right, lost her brother, etc. um but yeah, so it reminded me of that now that I reread it. So it's kind of interesting how, like, you come back to a novel and you remember recent things, um but he still has that idea, right, of manhood means you don't cry. um but I think that's part of the reason that the boulder he carries, like Sisyphus, is dragging him down.
Mm.
Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, not too much longer. He talks about I gotta be strong, but so that means in his mind, strong means like not giving in to those feelings.
Mm.
Exactly. He's thinking that to be a man, right, means to be tough, and you gotta not you gotta save face, right? But he doesn't have that epiphany yet that this is what's going to hurt him in the long run. So yeah. So this kind of takes him a bad direction, because um he mentions he was at Dre's funeral, but he wasn't, he says. Meaning, of course, like he's zoned out, right? He says. So he's still very much, I think, of course, processing this whole thing. And, going back to Everything Begins and Ends at the Kentucky Club, we talked about, what does it mean to mourn someone? What does it mean to, be at the funeral, right, where it's a public kind of ritual. So it's interesting seeing this one here where um,
Mm.
he's, of course, unable to process it um, in a way that is going to be good for him. And I think it's part of that reason, he has that very kind of Old Testament style thinking, right? Of an eye for an eye, because he
Mm.
feels like he's got to go after Ant now.
Yeah, his only conception of justice is that, just that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, after that, I didn't have something until 164. So I don't know if y'all had something, within those 30 pages or so.
I mean, I think ours going together because I had 163 and I think it's the same, but just from the previous page.
Mm.
I don't know if you had
Mm.
anything before that, Vanessa.
No.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we have the exact same passage. Maybe
Yeah,
where
I think
mine
so.
probably bleeds into yours, but it's this
Yeah,
conversation with Wyatt, and it just it's a talk, a different kind of talk. There's always kind of talks where I think Wyatt's kind of being this bigger for him. Um, says, son, the biggest lies ever told is that black men don't feel emotions. Guess it's easier to not see us as human when you think we're heartless. Fact of the matter is, we feel things, hurt, pain, sadness, all of it. We got a right to show them feelings as much as anybody else. Is that what you had?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of I mean, it's a what we were just talking about. It's him kind of understanding a different kind of approach to dealing with all this. And lastly, I just kind of again just talking about the different kind of approach Wyatt has with him. I guess like the tough love. I think it's encapsulated so well in this line that Angie Thomas uses in the middle of 164, or that passage. Mr. Wyatt grabbed the back of my neck, strong enough to tell me he got me, but gentle enough to almost be a hug. I think it's so important that he hears somebody tell him this.
Mm.
I mean, I started kind of crying along. Part.
No, yeah, man. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's such a strong passage, and why I see Mr. Wyatt as my favorite character, even though he's kind of a supporting character. Um, and that kind of oscillation, right, between Mr. Wyatt, he's got the three strikes rule, right? And I think at this point he's on strike one at least, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
um,
I don't think he gets more than the one, does he?
he gets two because I
Does get
think
to.
this, yeah, because one of them is smoking, right? And
Yeah. The other one's being him late. Are they the same one?
Oh yeah.
right, right.
I think it is the same one.
Well, and then is another one. Is it being with King
Yeah, I
or
thought that
no?
was related to the second one.
Mm,
Ah, man, I don't know. Oh, hazy on that.
yeah, but anyway, and he's so a lovable character, right? In the sense that he's full of love for someone who needs it, right? And you really see the importance of a father figure, right? So I think Mr. Wyatt's presence underscores um Mav's, uh Big Don's absence. um, and how much his presence here is missed. He doesn't even know what to make of this, right? He says, I don't know if I'm screaming or crying, man. And, it reminds me a lot of that show, Hentified, where I think it does a good job at that,
Mm.
of that kind of, relationship between father and son. Vanessa, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this one.
Um, I mean, I feel like you guys pretty much covered it. I do think it's like a really important moment. Just because it's like really discussing like the idea, or like, I guess in a sense the stereotype that like black men don't feel, but like everybody
Mhm,
has feelings. Um, so I think it's like really important to like keep that in mind.
mhm. It's funny, like he says, I pull my shirt over my mouth, but that don't muffle the sobs. It only catch my tears. So like it's total bonding here, right? And you could clearly tell that this is the first time for him where a man has told him it's okay to feel, like you're saying. Um, and why these kinds of discussions are so important, right? And for men, whether it's black men, Latinx men, you know, um, um, I should say, whether it's you know, however they identified by gender, right? Whether it's straight men, it's bisexual men, queer men. Um, I think this is a very important passage for all those reasons. So, and after this moment, um, they have this little where they're going to go to the football game, right? And it's kind of interesting how you know Ant turns out to be there, right? And you know, whom we thought would be a the antagonist, right? The one who was going to be the one he was going to go after, himself ends up gone after, right? And so on page 172, not a chapter goes by, or chapter goes by, and he's Ant lies on the concrete, dead in a pool of blood. Um, and in my passage here on 173, um, he says, the person who killed my cousin got killed. Kazant was shot at a school function. It was all over the news. His parents cried on TV, and I realized he had parents, like Dre. Some kids at school were really tore up over his death, and I realized he had friends, like Dre. At a stadium, he got a memorial, like Dre. Everybody got mourned by somebody, I guess, even murderers. I don't know how to feel about it. I'm not happy, and I ain't sad. I'm not relieved, not satisfied. I don't know. Um, and so it doesn't exactly um humanize Ant as much as it just kind of just normalize him, right? In the sense that he's ultimately just a kid, right? Who, yes, he is a murderer, um but it's that realization, right, that with this kind of gang violence and retribution, um that they're still in high school, and so kind of all the more tragic, right, that they were so young. And you wonder what could have been different.
Mm.
I mean, it's always some just yeah, well said, man. I also, I guess since we're here, I think I always want to point out stylistic things too. And so I love how from 171 to 172, the way that Angie Thomas like shortens her sentences. And
Mm,
I've always loved just how simple that works as a writing technique of creating drama, is shortening the sentences, and we're reading it. It speeds up your pace, and just just the blank, cold, no description, no frilly adjectives. Frilly, I don't know why I used that. Speaking of frilly of adjectives, um, just the simplicity of only one person not moving, ant lie on the concrete, dead in a pool of blood. I
Mm.
love the punch that has from writer to reader.
Yeah. And I think, that its crispness also is a stylistic attribute for, how there's no need to kind of, remain on that scene, right? There's no more details that are needed, right? Very Hemingway style description there. Go straight to, you know, Mav just kind of talking about what the aftermath of all that and how he's kind of ambivalent about it. Um, so, chapter 15 is where we're going to leave off and kind of takes an interesting turn right at the end
Mm.
because Lisa comes in. So 179 and 178.
It's almost like the point where you don't want to put down the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hold up, what? Although, of course, if you've seen The Hate You Give, you're like, oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Seen? Did I say seen The Hate You? I mean, read, but also seen.
Yeah. And apparently, well, we find out that Lisa is in possession of the time stone because we're told she says 4 words that stop time. But no, I mean, those words, I think I'm pregnant. After saying she was late. So
Good pickup for next episode.
yeah.
Mm. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Literally Literary, brought to you by Border Census and Power at the Pass. This episode, we discussed Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. If you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Join us on our next episode as we continue discussing the novel. Follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep and on Twitter at literallylit.ep.